probably been speaking about SAP HANA for the last 3 years or so at VMworld, and I'm really pleased now that you get to hear from our customers who are in production or moving towards production. So a little less me and more of our customers. So let's get to it. And Dan, introduce yourself, please.
So I'm director for all of our technical services side of the Johnsonville sausage. So that's network servers, PC support, our service desk, pretty much all of those pieces of the company.
I'm Dustin Burlekamp with Marathon Petroleum Company out of Findlay, Ohio. I'm the VMware and Wintel architect, so I'm responsible for the physical servers, virtualization layer, and the guest operating systems.
Contrary to the slide, I'm not Sean Donaldson. I'm Len Landale. I'm the VP of ERP and Application Hosting for Secure24. I work very closely with Sean, one of our CTOs, on our virtualized infrastructure and our virtualized HANA. My teams are responsible for hosting and managing SAP and a number of other applications at Secure24 for our customers.
So, excuse me, Mike Harding. I'm here with EMC IT. I am in IT. I'm not on the kind of the marketing or sales side of things. I'm like the rest of you guys in this room. I have a business to run, if you will, from a production support standpoint, implementation standpoint. I head up the architecture space for our SAP deployment. EMC is actually a relatively new customer of SAP. We've been running it for right around 3 years, so they brought me in to kind of as a veteran, if you will, in the SAP space to help them get it off the ground.
Thanks. So immediately, I'm going to put Michael on the spot here. We're going to, during this panel session, you're going to hear a lot about TDI, Tailored Data Center Implementation. So I'm going to ask Michael to explain what that actually is.
Okay, so I'll speak on behalf of SAP.
Yes.
Tailored Data Center Integration. When SAP first introduced HANA, they were basically introduced it strictly as an appliance offering, right? So with a vendor-supplied hardware, storage, and networking, mixture. That was what you brought in, deployed into your data center. I think a lot of customers grew frustrated with that model. It wasn't very cost effective. It didn't have a lot of flexibility. So SAP started to introduce the notion of tailored data center integration, which is, hey, if you have compute and networking and storage already in your data center, or if you want to go make a purchase that would help you meet this criteria, check it against what SAP calls the PAM, the Product Availability Matrix. And then you can kind of run it on your own, go through some certification tests. We actually went through and sent one of our full-timers into a consulting class, and he now has kind of grown a little bit of a team around figuring out the whole tailored data center integration testing process, meeting KPIs and things like that.
Thanks. And obviously, this integration or shared storage is key to our technology, so you can leverage features like vMotion, HA, DRS. So we're very happy that SAP introduced this model. So before we get into VMware specific questions, I'd like to ask each of the panelists here as to why they chose HANA. Was it strategic? What business problem did it solve? And then we'll get into the reasons why they virtualized it. So, Dan?
Yeah, absolutely. We started down the HANA path about 2.5 years ago, and it was really a big data scenario that we started looking at from our perspective. We're a consumer packaged good company, and trade promotion management is a huge growth opportunity for us if it's done right, and it's also one of the larger lines on our P&L. So we saw an opportunity with HANA to pull in all of this different scan data, point of sale data, transportation of the product, and we figured out that if we could analyze all of that in a good enough fashion, we could actually really improve where we're putting our spend. So we went to SAP, we worked on their trade promotion optimization. We worked with their system called, it was DSIM, or Demand Signal Repositories, to figure out where we should be spending and where it was making sense. And that's really the start of our first big data initiative, and that was our first big initiative into HANA. Now, there were some other benefits in doing that. Our entire BW environment got migrated over. So we started to see things like queries being 60% faster overall. And some of our really long-running jobs, I can think of one of them that used to be 8-9 hours, dropped down to like 30 minutes, which was, that's about a 90% increase in performance.
Impressive.
So from there, and we did all of that in physical appliances, as you talked about, because this was back when they didn't have any other options. From there, we've had such good luck with it that the organization has decided to move the entire set of all our landscapes over to the HANA environment. That seems to be where SAP is investing a lot of their dollars in strategically improving the product set, so that's where we're headed.
Yep. Thanks. Dustin?
For us, it was mostly technical. Our SAP environment's been up and running for about 4 years now, and just with all the data and all the users that had gone into it, reports had started to take, like you said, take hours, and users wanted them to run faster. So, we brought in SAP to take a look at what could be done, and the big thing they pushed for was HANA. So today we have just BW running on HANA, but the users are very satisfied with it.
Cool. Glenn?
So for me, being in the service provider industry, we get an opportunity to interact with a number of different customers, and I think some of the themes that are already developing here we see a lot of. So we see people looking to move to HANA to improve performance. We see people looking at it from a strategic and long-term direction, knowing that the money from SAP is going to be developed into HANA and S4 HANA. So people are using it to position themselves now for the future, as well as people trying to take advantages of moving off of older legacy agreements from a licensing perspective and renegotiating those. So we kind of see different reasons for people moving, but there's a lot of motion in that direction.
Great.
And I would say our story is really similar to Dan's, right? Dan. Sorry, I just met him. In terms of, we had a business need. We had, shortly after our go live of SAP, which was just over 3 years ago, some of our real-time reporting was running directly in the ECC core, was taking upwards of 2 hours to execute. The business needed it in, much less than that. They were asking for half an hour. So we went ahead and grabbed an appliance, threw it in the data center, started replicating data out, the typical sidecar approach, and ultimately we were able to deliver those same reports in roughly 5 minutes. So at that point, we as kind of the IT side of that fence saw the value of HANA, and again, for the same reasons, recognizing that SAP was going to continue to position all of their product offerings on HANA as an underlying platform. We've decided from there to make a more of an operational investment, and that's where we started down the TDI path as well.
Excellent. So what I'm hearing is it's strategic, it's mission critical, and I'm really pleased that our customers have the confidence to run such a mission critical application on our platform. So the next set of questions is going to kind of be rapid fire, and regardless if it's HANA or any database, typically the questions you always get associated with mission critical workloads is around performance, support, and licensing. So we'll go around the horn here again, and just what's your experience been with performance? You're on the road to virtualization, but in general, users running it on platform, any complaints? Is it meeting the objectives?
Yeah, I guess I would say when we virtualized our SAP environment initially, users don't know the difference. They can't tell whether it's running virtualized or not. I would say when we moved to HANA, users absolutely noticed a difference in performance at that point.
So we've not had any technical issues that we've had to get support for, but we've confirmed with SAP and VMware we're fully supported running it virtual. So it's been very smooth for us. We've had it in production for about 3 months now.
Great.
From a performance perspective, there's been no concerns or issues from a virtualization perspective, and anything that we've been doing from HANA or anything else, we're driving towards 99% virtualization as far as what we run workloads across many thousands of servers. So there's no concerns there. There's there's certainly other advantages that you're getting for any type of marginal loss that you get by going to a VM platform, and I think that outweighs anything you would see.
All right, we took an SAP BPC application, and we were one of the very, very first adopters of virtualizing HANA with this particular application. And in that case, we didn't even talk to the business about whether or not we were running on physical or virtual, right? The fact of the matter is we were getting off an old Oracle, row-based data store onto a new columnar in-memory data store, running it on virtual or physical. We were smashing the SLAs that we had previously established on the old platform. So I think to Dan's point, it didn't really matter whether or not we were running virtual or physical. It was more of a support concern at that point, which obviously we were able to get through with the certification that's been announced since back in 13.
Yeah, great. And last, I do want to speak to, you told us why you went to HANA, why the business needed to go to HANA. What drove your decision to virtualize it rather than to run it as a physical appliance?
So the reason that's driving us to virtual, because we're on physical appliances in production today, is we've had such good luck with it, and SAP has said this is our strategic direction, and now my applications group says, well, we need to move everything. Entire SAP environment, off SQL, onto HANA. So that creates a really big problem for us in an appliance scenario. There's just too many landscapes. We're running 7 different ones, and the way appliances handle that, it's just not cost effective. That's the biggest one. The other big issue is management. When you're managing all of these individual appliance silos, it's a lot more effort on my team to handle it than if it's managed, virtualized in the environment that they're familiar with for everything else. Other big issues we've run into is if there's a failure in an appliance environment, there's not a lot of operational decisions you can make logically to fix it. You basically are at the point of call to get the parts, you're down, or in our case, we can take down our dev appliance, rip pieces out and throw it into production. That's actually happened to us. And it's, that scenario doesn't exist in a larger virtualized environment. There you can make decisions logically about what you want to do.
Yeah.
So we started our journey into virtualization about 5 years ago. In 2010, we were roughly 10% virtual, just some dev and test workloads. Every year since then, we've had double-digit growth, percentage of our level of virtualization. Today, we're about 97% virtual, 98%. And our SAP environment from the start, when we stood this up in 2011, has been 100% virtual. So just because we were introducing a new capability of HANA, we didn't want to take a step backwards and make it physical. We wanted to go down the path of virtualization from the start.
Yeah, from a virtualization perspective, like I mentioned, we're very much committed to virtualizing pretty much everything. And over the last 5 years, anything that's been SAP in general has been going on VMware. So it was already our strategic direction. HANA certainly, with the TDI model, enabled it, but also pushes the envelope because of the memory footprint. So we need to strike that balance and virtualize where it's right to do. I think the biggest value add pieces for doing it far outweigh anything else, with the fact that you don't have a system go down and you need to rip hardware out, and you can DR it more simply, and you can manage it more simply. So a lot of the same kind of themes are what we're driving us in the same direction.
The DR scenario is a huge.
The DR for sure, the ability to remove single points of failure from a disk and physical server perspective.
Yeah, so from an EMC IT perspective, I think our answer was initially why not. When it comes down to virtualization, we've always been rather active in virtualizing. One of the first customers to virtualize Oracle RAC. So when HANA came in, even with our SAP implementation, when we first went live, before we brought HANA into the deployment, everything was fully virtualized. So even things like live cache and Trex, which are memory intensive, and by the way, which are effectively where HANA was born from. So HANA was just kind of another piece of the puzzle. I'll also say, though, as part of this, when HANA was introduced to market, Hasso got up there and said, here's my in-memory database platform, and I think it's going to be cost-effective in the long run, because if you look at how the IT trends have evolved, storage was what's expensive, and now it's cheaper, right? memory is now expensive, someday it will be cheaper. So this will be cost effective in the long run. We're not there yet. Compute is still expensive, memory is still expensive. By virtualizing, be able to manage your own allocation rates, you can really drive down your costs. As Dan said, it's not just a single production implementation. In our case, I have 9 plus 1, so I have 10 landscapes I got to deal with for every single HANA deployment, and that can be very costly if you don't manage it effectively.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. You can scale your memory a lot more easily in the virtual world than an appliance. You have to make the decision up front to buy the terabyte or 2 terabyte instance or whatever you need.
Yeah. And part of SAP's direction with dynamic tiering, and we'll talk about this later, is a smaller memory footprint. And with virtualization, if you've, for instance, deployed early adopter of, say, SP07, and you're licensed for a terabyte of RAM, but with techniques like dynamic tiering, you can reduce that memory footprint. You can actually consume the licensing that you've already paid for by creating more virtual machines for a productive manner. And that's not supported in the physical world. So really the only way to recoup some of your investment is through virtualization. And I want to touch on support, because there are some ISV vendors out there that I'm sure you're familiar with, have that nasty little caveat around if you virtualize, you have to reproduce the issue on physical. That's not the case with the SAP HANA platform, but I'll start at that end, since Michael, you've been virtualized and in production the longest time. Have you ever needed to reproduce? Has SAP given you that?
No, that was a threat when we first, so we actually went live with virtualized HANA before it was truly and fully certified and endorsed, if you will, by SAP. A little scary, but not really. And at the time, yes, we had a provision in place which said, okay, if we do have to reproduce this on physical, we'll have something. It was a very small implementation at that time, right, and it continues to be today. But as we've evolved since then, not a single one of our issues had anything to do with the virtualized layer. It's always been a HANA bug, an application bug. Any of our our issues are easily found and can be managed through the OSS message system. So no problems there.
Yeah, very similar concern, I think, with a lot of people that we talked to in the beginning when there was, the threat that maybe you'd need to reproduce it. We've never had to reproduce anything in the physical world. And as you kind of alluded to, the certification, the controlled availability of production support, I think, has eased a lot of those concerns that SAP has stamped it now and allows you to do that once you kind of give them a little background on your implementation and how you're going to do it. So,
great.
Yep. We've not had any. Excuse me. We've not had any issues with it, but again, SAP fully supports it being virtual, and VMware, is very happy that we virtualized it. We have a virtualization first policy, and really the only thing that we don't virtualize are applications that the vendor comes to us and says, we're not going to support you if you go virtual. And that was definitely not the case with this. We were encouraged to go virtual, and it's worked out very well for us so far.
Great.
Yeah, we're really in the same boat. We've tried to virtualize everything we possibly can in the environment, in our SAP environment for sure. So never been an issue at this point anyway with SAP support.
Yeah, great. And I think that's a huge differentiator when it comes to virtualization and SAP, since HANA is strategic for SAP, and this ability not to have to reproduce on physical it's huge. So. And I believe a lot of that is due to the relationship that we have with SAP. We're very tightly aligned. The certification that Michael was talking about, we've been at this for well over 2 years, and throughout all of this testing, there's never been a functional issue arrive associated with virtualization. So this is kind of given SAP that confidence that you don't need to reproduce this on physical. And then lastly, around licensing, and this is probably just a misconception, but I want to make sure that everybody knows that there is no uplift, there's no licensing costs associated with virtualizing HANA. So I'll let our panel speak to that as well, if they've been hit with any licensing costs associated with virtualizing HANA.
No. When you talked about this before, when you mentioned this, I was like, who's even heard of that issue?
Yeah.
I had no issues whatsoever. I mean, I recognize that when, there are some licensing structures out there that are looking at the core count When it comes time to HANA, they're really looking at your memory allocation. So your memory is allocated, at the VM layer, and you go from there. We haven't had any problems whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, of all the customers that we've got running and probably another dozen or so that I've been involved with to some level in architecting solutions around it, we haven't had that concern come up. So.
Yeah, we had no additional costs due to the fact that it was running on virtual.
I guess I would agree with that, except my VMware sales rep did talk to me about cores on that end. Yeah. So they're still not giving those away.
Right.
That we did have that cost.
Yeah. So it's just the cost associated with the normal
with
cost,
going virtual. Yep.
Virtual, and we treat HANA as just another virtual machine in your landscape. There's obviously it's a tremendous piece of software, highly performant, but from a licensing perspective, it's just another virtual machine. So there's no uplift associated there. So, Dustin, we're, a lot of our customers are kind of show me and, wanted to get a look and feel of how HANA would perform virtually and what are the benefits of it. We actually had, did a POC together and had the pleasure of working with his team. And I just want to, let you talk about that and did we meet your expectations? What did you learn from that POC, and was that instrumental in you going virtual?
Sure. So it was, I think, middle of the year last year when we started really looking at HANA, and our CIO set a goal of having HANA, not necessarily in production, but just having HANA running in the data center by the end of the year. So we knew we had to start investing in it and start understanding it so we could get something running. So we spoke at VMworld last year and set up a POC in, I believe, the fourth quarter. And our goal of that really was just to get it up and running so on the infrastructure side we could get a feel for all the best practices around it from your white paper. Are we hosting it properly? What do we have to do differently for the SUSE OS, because we're used to, we're a Microsoft shop, so this is going to be brand new for us. So there's a lot of things we needed to understand. On the application side, of course, it was brand new for them. They had to understand the new database format. They had to understand the database conversions into HANA, how much downtime they were going to have to take for production, things like that. So the POC was very instrumental in us meeting the CIO's goal. And it actually took less than a day. We got everybody in the room or on the phone that we needed to make it happen. And from start to finish, I don't know, 5 or 6 hours, but we had everything up and running. And the SAP team was able to start doing their conversion into it for our sandbox environment. So it was very successful for us.
Great. Yeah, and I've done a number of POCs with our customers, and I think your story is kind of representative of what the experience is. Customers who have purchased physical appliances, we convert them over, whether they're running Suite or BW, we convert them over in a day and have them running by the next day on virtual HANA. And Dan, you weren't quite as fortunate. I mean, you had already gone down the physical route and you kind of had to abandon it or do a 180. So I think people would be interested in how you're moving from a physical infrastructure to a virtual infrastructure and what that actually looks like.
Well, you guys alluded to it earlier, the whole TDI environment. That's really, by allowing that to be a supported scenario, that's the route we're headed down. Obviously, why we went physical to begin with is we did it long enough ago that option didn't exist.
Yes.
And as we look at taking and going from just BW being moved over to HANA to our entire landscapes, all 7 of them being moved over, it just became a scenario that wasn't cost effective on physical appliances for a lot of the reasons we talked about earlier. So that's really the driver behind going virtual for us.
Yeah, and I think that kind of the stars aligned for Dustin, where we were just announcing with SAP production support, you were in the midst of making your decision, should I go physical or virtual? So you hit us at a good time. Yeah. Len, can you talk about why your cloud offerings, the certifications, and why it makes sense to run on our platform in the cloud?
Sure, certainly. I think there's a number of reasons when you're talking about HANA where I think there's advantages to using, you know, a virtualized environment for sure, but also maybe a cloud or service provider offering. And maybe I'm a little bit biased there, but there's so much complexity. It's moving so quickly. It's changing so much over time. You know, the service packs are being released, you know, monthly almost, it seems, and new technologies being deployed and pushing down the HANA path. So I think to Dustin's team kind of arriving at that inflection point at the right time, we've seen customers who were already on physical who made that decision. We've seen customers arrive at that point in time, and we've got customers now who are doing more POCs. The flexibility, I think, that using a cloud offering, a virtualized environment allows you to quickly convert from physical, right, to do net new deployments onto an environment and not have high capital costs or high ramp up. A lot of those flexible reasons, I think, are the reason it's important. And we're running a project right now that's going to be deploying about 70 SAP instances. About half of those are on HANA and half of those are on their ASE or MaxDB instances. But they have a very aggressive time frame. They want their entire dev landscape up in 8 weeks.
Yeah.
You can't get physical hardware in and do all that in 8 weeks. The server team needs to deliver those instances to the application team in a week tops, so that we get to deploy. And some of those are migrated from existing sandboxes. Some of those are net new. So having an environment that's flexible enough to react to that type of scenario is, I think, kind of the reason that a virtualized environment that's back-ended by a team of individuals who has that knowledge and focus around it is key to, I think, customers being successful in this space going forward.
Yeah, great. And actually some great points there as far as protection of your investment. I mean, the way HANA has evolved from SB07 to SBS 10 is just a tremendous, you know, the amount of data that can be held in memory versus on disk is rapidly changed from, you know, early, I think SB09 was a 20% on your dynamic tiering host, 10 is 40%, and the future is 70%. So that's hard to make capital purchases against and not have to update your resume, you know, quickly. So, so I think the other interesting point you made was ASE. ASE is half of your customer base. Where do you see that falling in? Is that suite? Is that a typical generic database?
In general, again, these are kind of net new customers where we're seeing that play out. So people are buying SAP licensing for the first time now, not converting over from existing licensing agreements. Obviously, they're making a decision to go to HANA, and that's typically in the BW and ECC space. Or in some circumstances, just ECC because of HANA Live and running HANA views, HANA-esque views in ECC natively and not having the need for that additional landscape. So typically ECC, BW, maybe some SCM, APO type scenarios are where we see customers choosing to be on the HANA platform. And then, you know, your enterprise portal or maybe your PI instances that aren't going to have such a demand for performance and in-memory compute, you know, they're being delivered on a more traditional database platform that has a lower memory footprint and can take advantage of just regular virtualization and not necessarily worrying about the memory footprint and things like that.
Yeah.
I think a lot of customers are kind of headed down that path, right? Where so a lot of customers are saying, I want to get off of Oracle and I want to get onto SAP. Now that SAP is more of a database, you know, provider, and now that they have ASE, I can use that for something that's a little more cost effective, like a solution manager, a PI, or your SLD, or your GRC versus HANA, which is obviously going to be more kind of compute intensive, and you really don't want to invest in that unless the application on top of that is also being invested in, is investing in as well.
Yeah, and that's a great point. If you look at SAP's current positioning around HANA, they're positioning HANA as less of an in-memory database, but more of a database management platform. So it's a platform, and part of that platform includes not only dynamic tiering, but also the IQ component, which is kind of the, you know, what they what was purchased from Sybase. Yep. And we also position ourselves as a platform as well, because early on, we loved the HANA story, but we felt that everything in memory wasn't going to resonate with everybody. So we went ahead and we certified the entire HANA platform, which includes ASE, Rep Server, IQ, and of course HANA proper. And Mike, I believe you've been a long time IQ customer.
Yeah, we have been running IQ now for well over a year and a half. So after we kind of decided what our roadmap was going to look like for migrating HANA across some of our SAP applications, when we looked at BW, our growth rates were astronomical. We were 7 terabytes within 2 years. Mm-hmm. So I kind of a little bit of a gut check to the BW application team, said, guys, sure, we can put this on HANA someday, but you're going to have to manage this growth. By the way, SAP just came up with a solution to do so using nearline storage, which is a BW-specific capability in conjunction with Sybase IQ. So we rolled that out, and so that 7 terabytes was shrunk down to like 4 terabytes before we actually went through the migration onto BW HANA. Something like 300 to 400 million rows now have been offloaded, and now that we've been running BW on HANA for over a year, we continue to run right around every other month or quarterly executions out into the NLS or the IQ platform.
Great, yeah. I think that significantly changed the way in which HANA is sized. Just being able to offload the cold data from in-memory off to NLS,
right?
And that was an Oracle.
Yeah, so when we originally did it, Oracle was the primary database for SAP BW. We introduced IQ, so we were kind of managing hot and cold, if you will, between Oracle and IQ. The irony there is that when our administrators ran general queries against IQ, the response times were much faster than in Oracle. Again, row-based versus columnar-based. With Sybase IQ being a columnar base and Oracle obviously being row based. So that was step one, and then step two was the actual HANA migration of that Oracle database, leaving IQ completely intact without any real changes to the implementation from an NLS and an IQ standpoint.
Okay. Well, are you looking at dynamic tiering or?
We are looking at it. So one of the things we're actually working on now, which goes live at the end of this calendar year, is SAP CRM on HANA. And as we have been evaluating how much data we need to take off the legacy applications. Consider this as kind of a greenfield CRM deployment, migrating off of an Oracle e-business suite app. So how much data do we actually need to migrate over? We're using things like SDA or Smart Data Access to effectively load and convert less data into the HANA database platform and just do SDA type reads out of HANA and directly into the legacy application. So it's helping us again manage our overall footprint of memory consumption.
Great. And Len, I think being a cloud provider, you're looking for the most economical way to offer HANA to your customer base. How do you see this multi-temperature data management scheme working out and implementing it?
I think it's going to be huge. We've got a lot of customer conversation around it. We've got POCs running with some of our internal systems just to get the team up to speed on the technology. But ultimately, like you said, it's going to be managing that footprint in memory, and hopefully it'll make its way into the other platforms outside of just BW right now, because that's kind of just half the battle. We see a lot of larger ECC systems and things like that. Whereas customers can't take advantage of that, and I really think that's really going to be pushing down the S4 path and getting off of the traditional suite on HANA and moving to S4, because then you'll have a smaller data footprint in that system on HANA. I think really BW is going to take advantage of the dynamic tiering, and I think the S4 push is going to help manage the footprint going forward.
Yeah, I think the good news is SAP is recognizing that in order to improve or increase customer adoption, they're going to have to introduce more capabilities around data temperature management, right? Yeah. They're calling it data tiering, they're calling it data aging. At the end of the day, it all involves somehow reducing your hot footprint, your in-memory footprint, and leveraging other technologies, whether it's Sybase IQ, whether it's just that data aging concept, to drive down your overall in-memory demand.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is not only an architectural driven, but it's also customer driven to reduce those costs. And Dustin, when we were doing the POC and just comparing, why to virtualize and what were your decisions about that, we talked about, multi-tenant applications and how that differs from, say, virtualization. I think you had some interesting comments on how multi-tenancy is vastly different than, fully isolating virtual machines.
Sorry, can you ask it in a different way? Or?
Yeah, there's multi-tenant applications, and the question I get a lot is, if my application's multi-tenant, why do I need to virtualize? So Dan, maybe.
That actually fits really well with our environment as to why we're switching to virtual from physical. If you alluded to it earlier when you were talking about, I've got blades or servers sitting out here with a terabyte of memory on them, or 512 gig of memory on them. Mm-hmm. And I've got all these different landscapes, and some of them fit neatly into that space, and some of them don't. And so when I'm running in a physical environment, I'm putting something in there that fits nicely on that blade, that's great. But if I'm putting something in there that's 100 gig, in a physical scenario, I've burned the rest of that blade. It's doing nothing for me, yet I've still paid for it.
Right.
In a virtual environment, obviously I've got all the rest of that memory available to me, and I can load up additional instances, which is what you're doing today, right? Mm-hmm. Virtually, I can run 3 or 4 instances on that same physical blade.
Yeah. The reality is that when you look at SAP's internal development path, right? They have a set of CRM developers that work here. They have a set of S&OP developers that work there. So each one of their application developers is really developing on a different underlying HANA version. When you look at the core out-of-the-box multi-tenancy capabilities that SAP HANA provides, it requires you to all be on the same patch level. Mm-hmm. The reality is you can't do that if you want to manage multiple SAP products on top of one HANA platform. So this is where VMware really gives you that capability, that flexibility to do away with multi-tenancy per se and just manage them as individual implementations with individual patch levels.
Yeah, and that conversation comes up a lot in my world, and the other piece to that is around security. It's now you've got different either business units or even functional groups, and then one of them is going to have a driver to upgrade, and then you're going to have this big fight on your hands. Or in our space, it didn't make any sense to just build one big HANA instance and carve it up into multiple customer databases, because then you can't have network isolation and all the other wonderful things that come along with this traditional segregation. So I really see that as being kind of a blip on the radar as to how people are going to use it. It's got specific use cases, but in the broader context, it doesn't make a tremendous amount of sense.
Oh. Okay. Yeah, makes sense. So I just want to go back to TDI and touch on that again, and kind of go down the line again as to what that brought to your implementation. How powerful is vMotion? How powerful is HA? Not being able to have that dedicated standby. So, Mike, you want to start it off?
Sure. In our case, so we looked at SAP BPC, which is effectively a BW type application, generally a small footprint. And again, this was one of the first things we virtualized. And so one of the drivers from a cost perspective was, okay, if we do this physical, I'm going to buy way more memory than I need. Our BPC application today still only runs around 300 gig. And when we first went live, it was around 200 gig. So this was almost 2 years ago. So we don't necessarily use, a standby node, if you will, or any physical gear. It's strictly VMware HA, which is supporting the overall HA of the application as well. So that's really kind of helped us drive down the cost. And then from a DR perspective, we continue to use Site Recovery Manager, SRM, to support the overall DR kind of management and the playbook as well.
Great.
Yeah, I think TDI was really kind of the catalyst to getting to where we are at today, right? And when first hardware started coming in and it was pre-installed at the factory and then needed to be changed, you didn't have a lot of control. What TDI allowed for us to do is build the foundation for what is our virtual HANA cloud today, and gave us that control so that we can pick the components that make sense for our team and our business to use as the fundamental building blocks and not be, told that these are the only pieces that you can build from. So I think that was really the big differentiator for us once TDI was kind of announced, and it allowed for, 2 years ago when we started down the virtualized HANA journey to get off of the physical stuff that we're deploying and start down the foundation of what we have to.
TDI was critical for us being able to host HANA the way we wanted to. So 4 years ago, we had a company split, and so we're part of the downstream company in the oil business, which means we're responsible for refining, marketing, and transporting the oil. So we had to stand up our own data centers as part of that split, and we made investments in 2011 in some large platforms we knew we would be able to host most of our workloads on. We wanted to standardize. So when we first started talking about HANA last year, really the appliance was being pushed. The appliance model was the way to go. But that really didn't fit in with our strategy. We didn't want to have this little island of infrastructure. We have our standard data center equipment here. We don't want to have this separate piece to manage that, if the right guy isn't online on a weekend, who knows what to do with it.
Too much risk.
Right. So TDI, like you said, the time frame worked out because it was just going into production support on VMware. So that's really what helped us get it up and running when we wanted to, the way we wanted to do it.
Yeah. Great. Dan?
Yeah, it's the same scenario with us. I mean, that's what's leading us away from the physical appliances.
This isn't unusual, right? There's a lot of customers out there that don't want anything to do with those appliances, right? Your data center operators are like, you tell me I can't put my hands on this, I don't want to hear, right? So it's kind of a common, I think that the trend is definitely rising on TDI adoption.
Yeah, we hardly hear of customers going towards the appliance model, and it's because of its, as you guys described, it's the easiest way to deploy HANA, zero touch, and you're not, as Dustin alluded to, you're not going outside of your standard IT practices. So you mentioned SRM. Besides core vSphere, what other VMware products are you using within your SAP landscape to manage it? And if you can kind of describe briefly, what
so SRM is a huge one. Our entire SAP implementation is using SRM as a DR solution, or SRM is kind of the backbone, if you will, of the DR solution in conjunction with, some of EMC's replication technologies, of course. Other than that, the vRealize operations, or what used to be VCOPS, the artist formerly known as VCOPS, we use that for a lot of data center kind of visibility capabilities as well. So.
Similarly, I think we're leveraging vCOPS, but I think we're in a bit of a unique scenario because we've got other tools that are kind of holistically across the rest of our organization that we need to integrate into. So we've got other platforms that we've customized and use to manage our virtual environment. So we're probably a little bit of an oddity from that perspective. We actually are not, it's not in the HANA space, but we've got a VMware View desktop deployment that we're really coming to market with. Right now, that's, I think, coupled well with SAP for a fully virtualized solution from the desktop all the way up to the application tier. So there's been a lot of conversation around that today.
Great.
So we use SRM as well. We protect about 75% of our production SAP environment. We protect it from our production data center back to our non-production data center at the corporate office. And actually, as soon as I get back next week, I have to start preparing for our annual test that's coming up pretty soon. They're actually very happy with the fact that we're still going to be able to protect it even with HANA. The same way that they've gotten used to it being protected.
Yeah, that's huge.
Aside from that, we have Configuration Manager, vRealize. We're getting into NSX for microsegmentation as well.
So we're, VCOPS or vRealize. We do View, Mirage deployments. We do not do SRM. We do vSphere replication because admins are cheaper than SRM. So they can click the buttons and bring it up for a little less cost on my team. So I haven't gotten them to swing to that SRM scenario and fully automate yet. I would love to, but we're just not quite there.
Okay, great. Len, just go back to you. As far as your offerings, you offer both scale up and scale out options. Can you give us an idea of what your customers are looking at and what the reasons are going to either scale up or scale out option? And
well, certainly, I mean, it's kind of, a lot of it's driven by where they're at today. The only need to go to the scale out is if they've either got a large environment right now, and that's the only way to get to the footprint that they need, or they're projecting to be having a very large footprint. For some of the customers, after they do their SAP sizing for HANA, there's opportunities to reduce that footprint. You said managing, it's a big piece of it now, managing that footprint. They can archive data out, they can delete iDocs they didn't need. There's things they can do to control that. So once they get to the true memory size, then we need to look at architecting it properly to be either on a scale-up box to give them the growth they need over the next couple of years, or perhaps using multiple instances and scale out. So.
Okay, great. And I think the point you guys made around operations management of vRealize Suite is important, because with SAP now you have so many, HANA, you have so many different deployment models, whether you're going to do just scale out, do extended storage hosts with dynamic tiering, involve NLS. How do you make those decisions intelligently? And really, the only way is through data collection. So vRealize, BlueMedora plugin is very powerful. So last question before we open it up to the audience is, individually, what are you guys looking to get out of VMworld this year? Michael, I'll start with you.
So I shouldn't mention, is HANA going to be certified for vSphere 6 yet?
Oh, we'll get back to that one. Yeah.
I think, to be honest with you, a lot of excitement from our standpoint. We feel like from an infrastructure standpoint, we've kind of managed a very heavily growing, robust SAP implementation, and we're kind of looking at the what's next. So we just saw the keynote, the notion of a hybrid cloud scenario, being able to kind of manage both on-prem and off-prem, leveraging solutions such as VirtuStream. So that's kind of the stuff that I will be probably focusing on for the next couple of days.
Great.
Yeah, same kind of thing for me, just what the what's next aspect and how we can integrate, as a service provider with maybe on-prem, off-prem targets and things like that is going to be important. And me being in the SAP space, some of the non-SAP pieces and how we can leverage those in our practice is kind of what I'm going to look for.
Our use of Site Recovery Manager has really grown this past year, so I'm looking forward to talking to product managers about that. What's next for Site Recovery Manager. I mentioned we're going into microsegmentation. We're doing a pilot of NSX. So, how is that going to fit in, and what's coming next with that? And something I'm really interested in, aside from HANA, is virtual volumes, and all the benefits that we get of managing things at the data store level are now going to apply to each individual VM. So, I'm really interested in virtual volumes.
Great.
For me, it's really running multiple virtual instances on the same blade is kind of a pre-release thing right now, and I would love for an announcement to be made this week that that's no longer that way, and just everybody can roll forward.
And on that, I mean, in our case, anything non-production, we share everything, right? So I would say every single one of my non-production instances is running virtual today. I have very, very little physical everywhere. So some of those, I think, rules that you've heard about in the past and thresholds, when it comes time to managing your non-production demand, I think all those are kind of out the window. So,
and we should probably talk a little bit more about that since you brought up 6 and also consolidation of multiple HANA virtual machines, and just talk about roadmap and actually what's supported and how it's supported. The ability to consolidate any other virtual machine, whether it be an application server and one HANA instance on the same physical host, that's fully supported. That's in GA right now. The ability to support multiple HANA virtual machines on the same host is in controlled availability. And what controlled availability is essentially, if you want to get into the study, you send an email to the TDI alias. You're going to include the size of your deployment, the server vendor, when your anticipated go live date is, and then contact information. Send that to the TDI alias, and as long as there's no anomalies, you'll be entered into the study, and you'll receive full GA support for production. So you can do that right now, and you'll still be able to enjoy full production support. So it's really an administrative task. We'd love it to be full GA, but it shouldn't be an obstacle for our customers because, again, send that email out, you'll be entered into the study, and you'll be supplied full production support. And I'll touch on vSphere 6 certification. It's on our roadmap to get that certified, and hopefully we're going to get that done by the end of this year. However, I talked about this in my earlier session, and I'll still say it here, is that 1 terabyte barrier, that's an artificial barrier. I talk to customers all the time who think they need 6.0, and when I introduce them to the various multi-temperature data management techniques, they realize that they don't need to have everything in memory, and that 1 terabyte is sufficient for their deployment. So really understanding your data, what your data makeup is, what you're trying to do with it, is important when deploying HANA, not only from a cost perspective, but from a deployment perspective. So while I totally understand we have to support larger virtual machines, and we're working with SAP to get that done now, if that's holding up your deployment, what I would encourage you guys to do is to look into your data set and determine if you can use dynamic tiering to reduce that memory footprint, if you can offload that into NLS, so you're not holding that in memory, or purely archive. Because I worked with a customer just recently who was 4-node scale-out system, and they hadn't archived since 1999. So we introduced NLS and we archived their system. One node, and under 1 terabyte. So again, look at these techniques and understand your data makeup before saying I absolutely need 6.0. So do we have any questions? And last thing I said, there are a lot of good reasons to update to 6.0. You mentioned one of them is virtual volumes, but size is not necessarily that reason.
Michael, you said you have a TDI environment. Can you describe the process you went through to get certified?
Yeah, so there was a course out there, right? And it's generally tailored to consultants, SAP consultants. SAP will tell you to get somebody that's certified on their end to come in and actually help you through the process. It's nothing other than running a KPI tool set. So, and in fact, you don't even need HANA installed to do it. All it's looking at is your configuration of, it's not even looking at the configuration per se. It's doing some checks there, but it's effectively a script that just looks at, tries to run some benchmarking on the performance layer in terms of your IOPS and things of that nature. So the course itself, I'd have to look up the number, but we just basically sent one of our basis admins to the course. They got the certification. He now manages the whole process. Interestingly enough, I don't know if there's anybody from SAP in the room. When I worked back with the SAP guys, I said, okay, we went through this whole process. We got certified. Here are our testing results. Who do I send them to? They said, nobody. Good enough. We trust you. So I don't know how robust or structured the whole program is, if you will. The recommendation here would be, though, to make sure that you are meeting those thresholds, and that when you run the script, the results come back and everything says okay.
The only thing I'd add to that, just to answer the question, is, and you mentioned it earlier, I just want to reinforce it, there is in the PAM, or it's a separate site from the PAM, specific versions of hardware from each vendor that is supported for TDI. So you just want to check that your storage array and your compute and everything is on that list, and then you're pretty much good to go.
Off that list, is that effectively certified TDI?
Yeah.
No, you're going to need to do both. So step one, go look, make sure you conform to the products, right? The things that are on the PAM. And then step two is get it installed, configured, and then run through your script. Because you may need to tweak your configuration here and there.
You receive confirmation back that, hey, you're approved, you're good to go?
Not for TDI.
Yeah, no, you don't. You just run the script, and the script will give you and they do update this TDI script on a regular basis. So they add more kind of bells and whistles to it to make sure that anything that they've found with other customers are being now reinfused into that script. So.
The confirmation that Bob was mentioning is around controlled availability of multi-tenant production HANA virtualized support. So if you want to run 2 virtualized productive instances of HANA on the same ESX host, that's still under controlled availability, and that's where you need to engage the TDI group directly and get them to say, yes, we'll add you into the productive support group for that. But just running tailored data center integration, the components together to run your productive HANA, you just need to follow the steps that Michael was saying.
And just to add to that, I mean, Michael mentioned you need to have a certified HANA professional on staff, and to me, that's kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah.
I mean, that shouldn't be a barrier. If you're gonna deploy HANA strategically, or you're gonna run your business on it, obviously you want someone certified. So I don't see that as a criteria that you need to meet.
No.
Yeah, can you use the microphone, please? We can pretend.
Hello, yes.
There you go.
I'm just curious, what's the size of your HANA VMs today in memory and number of vCPUs? I'm just curious to hear the numbers out. If that's not confidential.
Well, I won't tell you names of people running on them, so I can give you numbers. Just because, again, we don't run it ourselves at Secure24, we run it for everyone else. I think the sweet spot that we've seen is about 512 for virtualized HANA. Certainly can go up to larger instances, up to 1 terabyte. But with the compression, a lot of systems, even if they're 1.5 terabyte today, are going to fit into that footprint. And then from a CPU perspective, there is there's a memory to CPU ratio. So that 512 instance is about 20 CPUs. And then it kind of scales down to their 10 CPUs for a 256 kind of thing.
Yeah, it's been our kind of sweet spot as well. We are obviously a big Cisco adopter, and we run pretty much all vBlocks within our data center. So we've been running a lot of HANA on the B440 blades, which is exactly the same specs as Len just mentioned.
Our HANA environment started at about just under 400 gigabytes, and it's scaled up about 15 gigs a month, so I think today we've scaled it up based on the NUMA nodes in the physical server. So today we're at 3 NUMA nodes. So it's got 30 cores and 760 gigs of RAM or so.
Yeah, we're not in production yet. We're still in development. So we're under 1 terabyte though.
Hi, could you talk a little bit more about your disaster recovery implementation? Why is it, from what I understand, majority implementations are SRM. Why not a stretched cluster, or why not a HANA replication, active-active transaction logs being shipped across?
Yeah, in my case, I'm happy to cover that. We simply don't have the data center distribution which would support something like that with a true zero data loss solution. So we kind of couple our EMC storage replication through a bunker site that's close to our production data center, replicate everything asynchronously down to an alternate data center that's 1,000 miles away. And so we're using that as the kind of the core protection of the database layer, and then so SRM is largely just managing my application tier.
We've got pretty much the same scenario. We chose to use Site Recovery Manager instead of the HANA replication just because we were familiar with it. We've been using it to protect the rest of the SAP landscape. So we didn't want to have, here's the majority of SAP with SRM, and then HANA is done differently. We wanted it all to be the same, so we just chose SRM.
Ours is cost. I mean, that's what it boils down to. We're not going to.
In the case of the SRM, how are you protecting the OS layer? I understand the data, but if it's the same OS image moving across the data centers, what happens if, let's say, OS file system gets damaged?
And at the application tier, that's less of a concern, right? When you look at a typical SAP implementation with multiple DIs, spread out, I don't necessarily need synchronous replication of those. Those can always just be quickly reimaged if they have to. I'm bound to at least get 80% to 90% of those up, if not all, right? So, things like your logs and your trace and your profiles that you generally have at the app tier, not as much of a concern from a data loss perspective.
Any other questions? I think we did that perfectly. We're out of time. I really want to thank you guys.